Why did we have massive mail-in ballots? Because of the coronavirus. Why do we have the coronavirus? Because of the Chinese Communist Party. Why do they have this opportunity? Because we brought them into the WTO, because we welcome them into the community of nations. It all comes together.
For years, DC decision makers have failed to understand the Chinese communist threat, and America is paying the price, says retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding. He's a leading expert on China and author of Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Robert Spalding, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Well, it's good to have a little bit of time to chat. It's an extremely busy time. There's a lot of questions about what's going to happen with this 2020 U.S. presidential election. What I don't want to get lost in the shuffle is how the CCP has been involved in this election. And this is something you have a lot of thoughts on, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that.
Well, I think the entire premise of 2020 has been about the Chinese Communist Party, because 2020 really has been about the coronavirus. And if you look at the leadership of Beijing and their actions in the aftermath of discovering, the lease, however it was characterized, whether it was deliberate or accidental, I don't typically talk about that. The spread of the virus itself was enabled by their actions. What is interesting to note is that in addition to enabling the spread through international air travel while blocking domestic air travel, they also locked down PPE and masks around the world. They also put pressure on the World Health Organization not to talk about human-to-human transmission. They also created disinformation campaigns to make it seem like the virus originated in America, it originated in Spain. They also had social media campaigns to essentially encourage the lockdown, encourage panic, to encourage this idea that the US and other countries weren't doing as good a job at handling the coronavirus as China. So when you add all of these things together, the actions by the Chinese Communist Party deliberately impacted the U.S. election. Not only did they impact it from this narrative of the U.S. wasn't handling the coronavirus well, and therefore that falls on the president rather than on the Chinese Communists for spreading it to the United States, but also this entire idea of massive mail-in voting. Now, when you start to get into the fact that not only did we end up doing massive mail-in voting for the election, all of the digital machines that are used for voting have either some bit of software or hardware that comes from China, maybe both. And noted in study after study that we have a challenge with both mail-in ballots and digital machinery, particularly that have components from China. When you get right down to it, from A to Z, from beginning to end, 2020, an election year for the United States, a major election year, because you're choosing the chief executive of the executive branch, the commander-in-chief, the most important election in our nation, and that entire year has been dominated by actions of the Chinese Communist Party. And if you don't understand the party and what they stand for, and particularly who they stand against, then you don't understand the motivations they have to do all of this. Remember, January 15th, the Chinese sent a delegation to America. Mind you, 8 days earlier, Xi Jinping said, "I am in charge of Wuhan." 8 days later, he sends his delegation to Washington, D.C. to sign phase 1 of the trade deal. Now, why are we signing phase 1? Because the Chinese Communist Party rejected the trade deal that would force them to essentially modify their economy and put in enforcement mechanisms that would make sure that they played by the rules. So you have to understand the entire context of what the Trump administration tried to do. Understand that the Chinese Communist Party was facing essentially the increase in unemployment in China, and their backs were against the wall. And they find themselves in early January 2020 with an opportunity. Now, they could have not done what they did. They could have locked everything down in Wuhan, but the other thing that you find out about the Chinese, and this is particularly with regard to Deng Xiaoping, he similarly finds himself and the party backed against the wall in a corner when Mao dies. The country is in shambles. It's just been destroyed with communism. And that's when he realizes, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black as long as it catches mice. In other words, attach ourselves to the United States. We move forward to the Tiananmen Square, and they come together as a leadership in Zhongnanhai, and they make the determination that, okay, this was a good idea to connect ourselves to the United States, but they're trying to overthrow us with a color revolution. It's not the fact that we're an oppressive regime, it's the fact that the United States preaches liberalism, openness, democracy, free trade, the elevation of humanity. That's what's causing this, and therefore we have to double our efforts to ensure that those values don't come into our society, but we need the economics, the trade, the talent, and most importantly, the capital to come in so that we can continue to grow our society. And so what do? They basically make a deal with the United States that leads to the WTO in 2001, which leads to the destruction of the working class in America. And finally, in 2017, the national security strategy that comes out in December states that the United States is awoken from its slumber. It understands what has been going on. And then it begins to fix the problem. And that's where we arrive in January of 2020. The Chinese Communist Party is once again backed into a corner. But, and this is a big but, we don't know how this virus released, but Xi Jinping finds himself in early January with a challenge. And when the Chinese think of crisis, it's about danger and opportunity. The word crisis is about danger and opportunity, the Chinese word for crisis. Danger, and I can take this crisis and turn it into an opportunity. And that's what they do. So when you look from A to Z, this relationship with the Chinese Communist Party has led to this point. And whether you see the signs or not, and most people will refuse to see the signs because they'll say, where is the order that Xi Jinping gave to tank the election in 2020? Show me that information. You can look at the articles that CGTN and the election and praising what they call, quote, president-elect. Now, you could, I guess, come to the conclusion that that was completely, there's no connection between all of those things and Chinese working to oust the president. You can say that there's no evidence whatsoever. And this is frequently how journalism and the intelligence community arrive at an answer from a policymaker or the public about what these Communist Party want and what have they done. And that's where we are today. And so you're going to hear, there is no evidence that the Chinese Communist had anything to do with what happened in 2020. And if we haven't learned anything about their involvement in where we are today, then it's difficult for me to say how much clearer it could be. Do we need Sherlock Holmes? I think it's very, very basic.
Of course, Robert Spalding, you've written the book Stealth War. You document some of these methods, the hybrid warfare techniques and so forth that the Chinese Communist Party has been using for decades to subvert America. Excellent book, and I highly recommend that anyone watching right now read it because it kind of builds on the ideas, I think, that you're just describing. But basically, yes, people will say, massive mail ballots, what does that have to do with the CCP?
Right, absolutely. What does it have to do with the CCP? Why did we have massive mail-in ballots? Because of the coronavirus. Why do we have the coronavirus? Because of the Chinese Communist Party. Why do they have this opportunity? Because we brought them into the WTO, because we welcome them into the community of nations. It all comes together. And I think for me, for once, the American people have been able to see what I have been trying to tell people is there. But you're not going to get this message from journalists. You're not going to get this message from the media. I dare say you're not going to get it from the intelligence community, because what they are looking for, and quite frankly, it is a product of our own reality, and that is there's a paper trail. There is evidence that shows direct involvement of a bad actor in some event. But what you learn watching movies like mafia movies and Al Capone, these organizations, particularly like the Chinese Communist Party, are some secretive organizations in the world. They don't telegraph what they're doing. The only time that you find out what's going on behind the curtain is when you have a major crisis in the country. We had it during the Tiananmen Square. The Tiananmen Papers came out. There was a major crisis when Xi Jinping was elevated to General Secretary, and that is with the tug of war between himself and Bosi. Then document number 9 comes out. So there's a lot of inter-party discussions that are leaked and translated. And then, of course, with President Trump, you have the Xinjiang Papers. Again, I had major company officials, Chinese company officials, when I was the defense attaché, get in my face and ask me, what is America going to do about Xi Jinping? What are we going to do? Because he's taking China over a cliff. And so it was because of the pressure the president of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, there's a belief that there's a good party and a bad party. No, they're all the same. They just have a difference of opinion on how to get there. So you can't go to the Chinese Party and say, hey, well, you guys that are a little bit more, not like Xi Jinping, work with us to get to a better future. No, they both agree on the future, and the future is one where the Chinese Communist Party exists in a world where it preferences authoritarian regimes, and the leaders of countries work together, much like the kings in Europe prior to the Peace of Westphalia. That is what China wants. They want only strong leaders around the world. And of course, this narrative that has been concocted by the media makes it sound as that strong leader, but in fact, what the Chinese Communist Party wants in America is essentially this idea of a partnership between the corporate side of the United States, both political parties that enable profits for the wealthy and suppress the interests of the working class. Because in order to do that, or in order to remain in power in China, the Chinese Communist Party must take jobs out of free societies. And so this idea of a globalized, internet-connected world was a perfect environment for them to wage what Mao called people's war. We are, in 2020, in the midst of a people's war waged by the Chinese Communist Party around the world to essentially destroy liberalism. And in many ways, we're cooperating because we censor ourselves, which this is the most incredible thing, because as I was working in China and understanding the Chinese Communist Party, I could look at the United States and see many of the same things that were happening in China. In other words, widespread censorship, widespread oppression of views. In other words, there's only one truth, and it's the truth of Chinese Communist Party issues. And if you have another opinion, then you're isolated. There's a thing called a social credit score. And so if you speak up, if you have a different opinion, then your score goes down, and your access to services, your access to capital is taken away. Essentially, you're shunned. You have a scarlet letter, a digital scarlet letter. These are the things that the Chinese Communist Party is working very closely with our own corporate sector, our own academia, and our own political institutions to essentially promote things like critical race theory, things like applied postmodernism, things like social justice that really has less to do with equality under the law and more to do with a very particular form of racism. This feeds right into what the Chinese Communist Party wants to do. And look, there's a number of people pointed this out that understand it, that are fighting to do the right thing on the left, on the political left in the United States, and on the political right. And it's not about, in America, it's not about the left and the right. It's about recognizing what's happening to our society and recognizing the desire of many within our society now because of these programs, these critical race theory and social justice programs, mainly in the humanities in our universities. And in the culture of our universities that has promoted this, and it is the coming together of the Chinese social and political system that they created, and increasingly the social and political systems of the West.
Many media in the U.S. have actually ended up calling the election for President Biden. We haven't done that at the Epoch Times. We want to see how things play out with all the different challenges that are in play right now. But it's notable that the Chinese Communist Party has not come out, and other world leaders have, to congratulate a potential President Biden. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the news media, which controls the narrative in the United States and is owned by 6 major corporations, essentially have all come together to create this environment where there's one truth, and it's very much goes along with what I was just saying. Why Russia and why China have not rushed to congratulate the president elect, whoever it is because they both understand that in America, you still have rule of law. And they saw in 2000 that there was a disputed election for 37 days. Somebody was promoted as the president-elect, and then on the 37th day, we had somebody else. So they understand that as much as some people would like it to be one way or the other, we have rule of law, we have due process. These are not things that exist in Russia or China. So I think they're hedging their bets. Again, the one thing that you can count on the Chinese for is that they are always pragmatic, and so they are watching, they are waiting. They are not going to be too hasty. They want to understand who's actually inaugurated.
Rob Spalding, it's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you. They understand that as much as some people would like it to be one way or the other. We have rule of law, we have due process. These are not things that exist in Russia or China. So I think they're hedging their bets. Again, the one thing that you can count on the Chinese for is that they are always pragmatic, and so they are watching, they are waiting, they are not going to be too hasty. They want to understand who's actually inaugurated.
Rob Spalding, such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.